Purpose of this presentation is to introduce the material needed for the first assignment of research project. We're going to be defining some key terms and looking at some of the background that we're going to need in order to produce a review of methodology. So research itself is finding things out in a systematic way in order to increase knowledge. Now the critical things here are that gathering new knowledge doesn't happen purely by accident. We need some kind of method and approach in order to make it happen. So the systematic approaches enable the researcher to ensure that the most appropriate methods are used and that they can be explained in that others can understand and replicate the activities that the researcher has used. Now, in order to structure the work, there's a very specific research process that researchers will follow. First off, there's a lot of background reading or background research that will enable them to decide upon the kinds of questions that they want to ask. From there, a researcher will generate some kind of research proposal which aims to prove the worth of the work that they're going to do and show that it is actually manageable. There'll be some review of existing work, so secondary research reviews, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. And from there, then, the researcher will generate the types of questions that they want to ask in order to answer their research question. They'll then evaluate and select methodology that is most appropriate to answering the questions that they want to have answered. Now, there are a variety of different methods that could be used, and not all are appropriate for all the different kinds of activities. So it's really important to review and assess which method is going to be most appropriate. And again, we'll have a look at some of the methods during this session. Once the methods have been selected and justified, they need to be employed in order to generate primary data. So they're going to go out there and actually gather information, whether that's through a survey or through a series of observations. And then this data is reviewed and conclusions are drawn that aim to answer the questions that were initially asked. Finally, then, the research is concerned with presenting their findings, whether that's in a written report, a presentation, a poster, or any other kind of method. So the first port of call, if you like, is the secondary research element. So it's really important that we review the work of others for a number of reasons. Now, the work of others could come from television documentaries, newspapers, books, journals. There are a whole variety of different ways that we can gather information on the work of others. Once we've gathered literature and artifacts, we can assess the current level of knowledge. What do we know now, and where are potential gaps, or what could be built on? Identifying the gaps will provide the opportunity for a piece of research that is truly new and very interesting. Quite often, though, we just want to build on or confirm what already exists. We can also use this to consider the approaches and methods that others have used, so that we can either do the same, or we can deliberately choose to do something different in order to make our work unique. We can also use secondary research to show where what we will build upon what already exists. So if there's a level of knowledge to a point, can we advance that to a new level? Once we've decided upon these things, we're going to design primary research approaches to actually address the questions that we're interested in. So we really want to generate new information through our primary research. This could be by asking the same question that another researcher has asked, but to a different group of people, or it could be by asking entirely new questions. We're going to engage with individuals in the type of research that we're interested in here. This is sociology research, so we're more interested in engaging with individuals rather than systems or processes or machines. The information that we gather will be very specific to the direct question that we're being asked. Now, secondary research, whilst it's easier in terms of resources, it's very unobtrusive because you're not interrupting people or invading their privacy. It also has issues related to whether or not it actually meets the need. So we could be using some secondary research that isn't specifically the same as what we're looking for, but has enough similarities to make it valuable. In this case, the primary research is directly related and is directly valuable and will directly answer the questions we were trying to ask. We can employ a variety of different methods to gather this primary data. We don't just have to employ one, we can employ more than one. We can use one to confirm the other, or we can use one to inform the other, depending on what we're trying to achieve. So there are a variety of methods that we can use that are at our disposal, and what we need to do is to look at these methods and decide which is going to be the most appropriate given the variety of impacting factors that we will discuss. So the primary data and information gathering tools that we're going to be most interested in are formal and informal observations. So an informal observation normally informs research. The observer will go in and they will look at what's happening without any specific criteria in order to draw out the key points. Whereas formal observations will go in there with specific criteria to be observed for, such as behaviours or activities that an individual may be engaged in. We could carry out interviews, and there are 3 different styles of interviews we can carry out. We've got formal interviews, which is very much like asking a survey in person. We've got a semi-structured interview where we would write down a series of questions but allow ourselves to ask further questions around those. And then we've got an unstructured interview where we just allow the course of the conversation to draw out information. We could use a focus group, which is almost like interviewing a small group of people all at the same time, but we can also record their interactions with one another rather than just our interactions with them, which can sometimes provide better information and may allow them to be more uninhibited in our presence. And then probably the most commonly used then will be some kind of questionnaire or survey that would combine a mix of open and closed questions. So a closed question being one that has a categorical response, like yes or no, 1 or 2, where an open question would ask for an opinion or some kind of longer answer response to justify some kind of feedback. Essentially, all these methods allow us to use both quantitative and qualitative approaches. So quantitative approach is one where we can use numbers and statistics to analyze the responses. So how many people like going to McDonald's for lunch, or how old are the participants in our study. We can quantify that type of information. Whereas qualitative, these are the longer answer, opinion-based questions, and these type of feedback tends to provide more color to the work that we've undertaken in a quantitative context. So for example, Whiskers used to say that 8 out of 10 cats preferred Whiskers, which is a quantitative statistic. It's numbers. However, what that doesn't tell us is what happened to the other 2 cats. Why don't 2 out of 10 cats like Whiskers? Or what is it that the 8 out of 10 cats prefer? How could we improve Whiskers to make all 10 cats like it? Qualitative responses enable us to gather that kind of information so that we can really make our research more useful. So we're going to explore these more in class, and you will need to take class notes on these different methods because this will form the bulk of your first assignment.